Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
All right, it's episode 102 of the MMA Outsiders. Each of us are back from our own little journey. I'm back from a journey of hell, still kind of in a journey of hell. Zain, you're back from a journey of heaven at the UFC Apex. And, well, we're here to discuss a lot. You and your little journey at the Apex. Obviously, I'm repping the PFL today for a very important reason. And we've got plenty more to talk about. So, Zain, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Finally got the hours of sleep that I needed within the last several days.
You were probably pretty jet lagged.
It was bell to bell for 4 days in a row. Oh, didn't get physically into Chicago until 11:30. Didn't physically get into this room until 1 in the morning. So, if that goes to show you how crazy the last few days have been, that's practically what it was. Overall, a very good time in Vegas. No complaints. Shout out to me officially meeting my first Banford Station guest, Nick Kalikas, the other day, and all the stuff the UFC did for me. It was a total blast.
Awesome. I'm glad you think so. We'll get more into your Apex experience as we get through the show. But just quickly, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Help us continue our climb to 900 subscribers. We are so close, and then hopefully we get sooner or later to that big 1,000 mark. Again, that's youtube.com/ETV Network. Of course, if you can't watch us on the YouTube feed, then take us on the road with you wherever you get your podcasts, on Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so much more. If you are doing so already, we thank you. Make sure to come back to the YouTube end. And of course, then I would be remiss that I did not mention that the MMA Outsiders and everything else here at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETV Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. Basketball time. It's basically here. So Nick Morganson and I last night did an NBA Classic stream of Shaquille O'Neal's debut as a Los Angeles Lakers. We will do one also this Wednesday night, I believe 8 p.m. Eastern. Looking back on the Miami Heat Big Three's debut in late 2010 against the Boston Celtics. And then next week, we've got NBA Tip-Off. That's Tuesday night, the 22nd. I will be there because my New York Knicks are in the very first game of the season, taking on Ben Cruz's defending NBA champion Boston Celtics. So that should be a blast. So I'll be there. He'll be there. Nick Morganson will be there. So that's opening night. And then I forget what the second game is. Is that Pat's Timberwolves that are in the second game?
Yep, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's Minnesota Timberwolves and the LA Lakers. That's right. It's the debut of LeBron and Bronny as a pair.
Should be a blast.
Yeah, I think we're going to be doing both of those games. So it'll be a little bit of a long night, but NBA season is here, and we'll have plenty of NBA games as the schedule goes on. But we're not here to talk about the NBA. We're here to talk about MMA. We're going to talk about the Battle of the Giants card with my boys over at the PFL. Boys and gals, I should say, this coming Saturday. A certain Irishman has opened his mouth again, which...
Again.
While
promoting a totally different event in a totally different sport in a totally different country, because of course he did.
And on a card that featured a couple of guys who, no disrespect to them, aren't even fighters.
And a couple of guys were one out of the two of them, and we might actually consider friends in the industry, which is hilarious to even think about. So
yeah, we have some UFC announcements, and of course, a little bit of recapping. You know, you have Artur Beterbiev becoming the undisputed light heavyweight champion, very controversial fashion. We'll recap UFC Vegas 98 later in the show towards the end, but Zain, let's talk about your experience, because you got a very rare opportunity. Not everybody gets the opportunity to actually go see the UFC Apex and actually gets to go see, you know, a UFC fight night held at the Apex in person. But you got the opportunity to do that with UFC Vegas 98 this past Saturday. So, first of all, little Q&A set. How did this happen? What the hell was it like?
Sure. So I can tell you. So this has been in the works for quite some time. I would actually say a couple of years now. Just the timing hadn't worked out in previous years for me to actually make the trek out there. But thanks to some very, very, very nice UFC employees that I got to know the very first time I was in Las Vegas for the Conor McGregor Dustin Poirier 3. Rapport was basically built with them where they were like, "Oh, Zain, if you ever come out to Vegas, again at some point in the future, you can go see the Apex. You can get a tour of UFC headquarters, and we can kind of show you just behind the scenes of basically how the UFC looks from like a non-outside world perspective." So, in a nutshell, that's basically how this occurred, and it was basically like an open invite, like, "Oh, Zain, if you want to go to a UFC event, literally any UFC event anywhere in the world, just let us know, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that you have the necessary arrangements in regards to access to make sure that you can make the event in sort of a broader hospitality way as possible." So when I was looking at the remaining UFC schedule after UFC St. Louis, I'm like, I want to go out to Vegas again. And as you and I both know, we covered this, in previous months on the show. I was hesitant about International Fight Week because I saw the ticket prices for then McGregor Chandler. Obviously the price skyrocketed. Of course, the fight got canceled via the Alex Pereira fight instead against Yuri. So I'm like, this possibility is out. I got to look at a fight night card. I was considering the Sphere, but the Sphere would have just been way too difficult. And those ticket prices were obviously jacked up until the day of the event, and then they dropped, of course. So that's when the Apex idea came about. I was like going at the Apex schedule. I'm like, what in the world is the best Apex event remaining on the schedule before these renovations are supposed to happen? And sure enough, UFC Vegas 98 is the one that I picked for the sole reason that, it was a contenders fight. If you look at the remaining Apex shows, yeah, the one we're about to preview this weekend is a solid main event for a hardcore fan, but there's really no title implications in that one. Then the next big, what would have been an Apex style fight night main event is in Macau, China. So I knew that wasn't possible. So it kind of led to, going to this fight and seeing Royval versus Taira. And
sorry, Zain,
how the fight eventually played out. Sorry, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to just to comment. I mean, there is one more Apex card after this week, which is UFC Vegas 100, which has several decent fighters on there. You have Rainer de Ritter's debut, Cody Garbrandt, Miles Jones, but I mean, to your credit, when you're talking about main event, Neil Magny, Carlos Prates, that's your choice.
I mean, if that isn't the most UFC Apex level main event that you can get, I don't know what is.
I just hold on. I mean, you have Cody Garbrandt, Miles Johns. You have a couple other names in fights. Obviously, maybe not main events, but Stamon Blackshear, Rainer de Ritter, the former one champion, who could be making his debut. But you go Magny Prates?
Hang on. Just to kind of drift away to this for a second. What in the world is de Ritter doing fighting at the Apex and not in like Macau or in T-Mobile Arena or and or even though he wasn't signed to the promotion yet, like put him anywhere but where he where he was.
At
Like,
least if you're gonna give him the Apex treatment, give him a main event or a co-main event.
yeah, I don't know, man. So that's kind of how I ended up making my decision. So these plans have been locked in since like mid to late August or so. So I've been looking forward to this for a while. Didn't make it too public on social media just because I was worried like, oh, if something comes up last minute, I don't want to let any of my I don't want to let any of my people down that follow my work and all the stuff that I do. So I'm like, oh yeah, we're just gonna do it. So I was there for 4 days, did some non MMA related things first. I actually get to check out the Sphere, and my goodness, I mean,
That
if
was
you
gonna be my
ever get
next
a chance,
question.
if you ever get a chance to go, I'm kind of going to go in chronological order. So starting with the Sphere, if you ever get a chance to go to the Sphere, no matter if it's a concert, no matter if it's an eventual, no matter if it's another sporting event they choose to do or something along that sort, super super nice, easy to get around, really really friendly staff, and you're just mesmerized by the walls. When I was at this YouTube movie, it was their immersive concert experience. They pretty much repackaged it so anybody could go in and watch the concert as if it was live, even though it was like pre-taped and stuff. You are mesmerized by the walls. I found myself looking at the walls more than the actual stage itself, and it felt like you were just watching a movie on basically a giant overhead screen with like real like revolutionary technology that's probably only going to be in a few buildings over the next several years until the world gets smarter, et cetera, et cetera. But overall, though, really, really cool experience at the Sphere. Could not imagine what it would have been like being for UFC. I saw pictures of it, like when the UFC event happened, and it definitely felt like a show. This one felt like a show too, even though it was pre-taped. So, getting to Friday, which was my UFC headquarters experience, you walk in, and just like in the documentaries, you see the huge open space that they have. It's got a bunch of awards. It's got a specific TKO belt right in front, to show like who the main owner is. Then it's got like the UFC belt in the middle of it and a couple other things. It had like a few coffee table books too. And you basically get greeted by security, and then I basically waited for the tour to begin. They basically told me about the history of the UFC Apex and its campus first, how it came to be. Some stuff I actually didn't even know. This was actually based on I think it was Man City or something. They looked at like professional soccer leagues to figure out like how the Apex and Performance Institute was going to be built, and that's basically what gave them their inspiration. Is they want like the people who work there and all the people that are involved to basically look next door and see the athletes, preparing for what that they do best to show like, okay, we're not just working for ourselves, but we're working for the greater goal of the brand. So that was really interesting too. And then the Performance Institute was just awesome. So it had like a full on cafeteria. Every meal for the fighters is free. Any meal prep plan that they possibly could need or want is available to them. They could even have their meal shipped to them. If you can't physically make it to the Performance Institute and they're on like a weight cut or they're on like a dieting spree, they can literally arrange any arrangement that the fighters need. They can possibly get, which I thought was super cool. They even have a room, which I thought was very unique in the Performance Institute, where if you go to Salt Lake City or if you go to Denver or you go to Mexico City, you can literally train in altitude to get used to what the altitude is going to be like going into a fight rather than having to go out a month early, spend probably thousands upon thousands of dollars to train in that altitude. You who can do it all in house
Wow.
in Las Vegas, which I thought
Never.
was very, very interesting.
Yeah, never really thought, because typically, we've talked about it, when they're going to places like Denver and Mexico City, that, hey, you need to travel out there. You need to get there early to get used to the elevation. I didn't know the UFC Apex had something already to work with
Yeah,
that.
it's more so the UFC
Or Performance
Performance
Institute, I mean.
Institute in necessarily the Apex, but yeah, they basically have any sort of adaptation that you could possibly need. overall, though, a really cool experience. Got to meet a bunch of the fighters, including Forrest Griffin, who basically heads the Performance Institute. I was making a joke with him. I'm like, Forrest, do they ever let you leave the building? Because it seems like you're like such a pillar in this. And he's like, no, they actually can't get rid of me. I'm here more often than I probably need to be, but they need my.
He probably has a room somewhere with like basic human necessities.
I would hope, I would hope so. That's an answer that I will never know, but I hope I hope to some degree that those arrangements have been made somehow, some way. So that was very cool. The tour was about an hour. Unfortunately, second floor off limits, so unfortunately couldn't see any of the Mike Tyson murals. Couldn't see Dana White's private kitchen, which really did bum me out. I was hoping I'd get a chance to see that. So, which also meant no access to the private kitchen, no access to Dana White's office, which means no access to either War Room, Power Slap, and or UFC.
I was just gonna say that means you can't see the War Room. Oh,
yeah. I think after the whole incident with a certain someone who we can't stand on the internet, I think the second floor is going to be off limits for a really long time. So, hey asshole, if you're out there, I think you ruined it.
I was just going to double check and make sure it was asshole.
So, I can't confirm nor deny that. But I was told that I don't need to see the second floor, so I just simply left it that. Although, because I'm a smart guy, I know what's on the second floor, so it kind of bummed me out a little bit. But I did get to see the Joe Louis statue, and the Dana White asked Idris Palace to bring him and remake, and it actually looked pretty cool. So, unfortunately, no sign of Dana. There were some signs of some very prominent UFC executives, but on my specific tour, Dana White was not present. Hopefully, he was busy doing other things rather than talking to me, as he probably should be anyway. So that was Friday. Saturday was an early wake up. First fight was at 1 p.m. local, and you basically walk in and you're basically just escorted right away. Or like they check your name, they make sure it's on a list, they give you your ticket, and they basically just escort you to your seat. And once they sat me down, they're like, "Hey, we want to take you over and we want to show you something." So they take me over to this back way, which I don't think a lot of people could physically go this way, even if they tried. So they took me to this back way, and sure enough, they open the door, and it's this all-inclusive VIP lounge presented by Happy Dad. So you walk in, and there's 3 TVs. There's like as much food as you could possibly imagine. There was like new food coming out all day, all-inclusive drinks. A bunch of UFC fighters were in there getting settled. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I pretty much had access to this lounge for literally 8 hours to where I could go to the back, whenever I wanted, and go to my seat whenever I wanted, which was very unique. And then I got to sit basically front row, off to the left of where the blue corner is, and off to my right was where the fighters walked in, and I was literally one barricade away from sitting in what would be a Dana White seat on a weekly basis. So,
oh, wow.
I did not risk myself getting kicked out, and I did not go up to the front row to sit next to the Vanderbilt baseball coach. I know. Oh no, I don't know who would have stopped me, but I could guarantee you that had I done that, I would have definitely made it on TV.
Shout out to them though. Shout out to the UFC Apex people for getting the Vanderbilt baseball team in there, and just, I hope that's the future, that we just get more and more people into these Apex cards, if this really is going to be the future of UFC fight nights, especially if you can get some rowdy high school and college kids in there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a super intimate experience. You could hear everything. When I'm trying to, I don't remember who he was coaching, but Sean Strickland was in the corner for someone, and the people were there just like just like went ballistic when he walked out. People started chanting Strickland and stuff like that, which I thought was very interesting.
Did you get to meet any of our MMA media colleagues while you were there.
I did. So, in our group chat, Hero Guerrero, who goes to
Yes.
UNLV, he was there covering the fight, and I actually got to watch the main event with him. Like, I came over and I sat next to him, and he was great. I got to meet him, and then I got to meet Alex Bahunin of MMA Mania at the end of the event, which was very cool. He actually had the main event, which we're going to get into in a little bit. He had it 3-2 for Royval, so he actually thought the judges got it right. So
awesome. Yeah, we'll talk about the main event in a little bit, but overall, you seem to have a hell of a time.
I did. I had a great time. Very unique experience for my 12th UFC event in person, and I'm just gonna say because I can. It was my first UFC event where I was given free tickets, and I don't take freebies lightly. But given all the perks that came along with it, I was very pleasantly surprised because none of it was told to me before walking in that like any of that was going to be possible. So shout out to everyone who did make it possible. You know who you are in that regard, and yeah, I don't know when my next Apex show is going to be, but you better believe that this 2 UFC event a year thing is probably going to become a norm for me. It's just going to be a matter of which ones I end up making it out to. So it was cool though. Definitely, if you have a chance to go to the Apex or you have a unique opportunity to go, you shouldn't say no to it. So
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. That sounds like you had a blast, and hopefully I get somewhat of a experience one of these days. Although I guess I can say I do get, get the opportunity to rub some elbows with PFL people, which I think good transition into the other main reason that we're here this week. We've got the Battle of the Giants this week. The long promoted pay-per-view of the PFLs is this Saturday. Special afternoon start time. Actually, even the UFC's pay-per-view next week, both in the Middle East. So we get some early start times this week. I believe for the PFL, it's going to be 1:30 Eastern for the prelims, 4:30 Eastern for the main pay-per-view. And in your main event, Zain, it is the long-awaited return, and on the MMA side at least, of the lineal heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou as he takes on the 2023 PFL heavyweight champion Renan Pereira for the first ever PFL Super Fight Championship at the heavyweight level. So here we are. They've been building to it for months. We finally have a fight. Obviously, Ngannou took a little venture into boxing with a pair of fights with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. Unfortunately, dealt with a very tragic loss with the loss of his son. And now, about a year and a half after he signed, with the PFL, after parting ways with the UFC, here we are. It's finally time.
yeah, I mean it was a long way off for sure. And what I think is the most interesting is just, I mean, the emotions surrounding Francis' return. He talked about why he's fighting, in this spot that he's in now, that he's doing it for his family. He's doing it for his son, who unfortunately he did, obviously he loses the wife earlier this year, and that I think really did light a fire under Francis Ngannou that he has a bigger purpose to compete. And, I think he's doing this too, to show the world that, he can succeed, in another organization that doesn't have, an additional 3 letters attached to it. And this is his chance to prove that, in my opinion, in your opinion, in most people's opinions, that he's still the best heavyweight in the world. So, I mean, just for that alone, there's no way I can't pick him. And I understand that Renan Ferrer has a lot of power. I understand the way he knocked out Ryan Bader earlier this year was in such a way that no one had ever seen before. No one ever knocks out Ryan Bader the way that he did. But when you look at resume to resume, fight by fight, style versus style, I don't see how Francis Ngannou loses this one. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, this fight's definitely not going to make it past the first round. I think both men
I don't think so either.
I think both men have the capabilities where one of them is going to timber before the first 5 minutes are even up. I think the question is the potential for ring rust with Francis Ngannou. Now, obviously, he hasn't been completely inactive, as we talked about. He fought the then heavyweight champion of the world in Tyson Fury. And he managed to, we can mention how Fury pretty much didn't take that fight seriously, but he dropped Tyson Fury. And then he took on Anthony Joshua, and he felt some real true power that a boxer could have. My question is that going to be enough to prepare him for what Renan Ferreira can offer? At the same time, we talk about some of the names that Renan Ferreira has faced. Do any of them have the kind of power, record-breaking, noteworthy in the world power that Francis Ngannou has? And I want to say no. So, Zain, you're muted. Hold on,
I was gonna say no too, and what I think is even more interesting about that also is the fact that Francis has been in bigger fights before. Let's be honest, he was the former UFC heavyweight champion. He fought a murderer's row, and I mean that in the nicest way possible, up to becoming the UFC heavyweight champion, including beating the consensus greatest heavyweight that the UFC had ever seen. So, I mean, I just think it goes to show that when you compete with Francis Ngannou, you're competing with more than just Francis Ngannou. You're competing with the aura of him. You're competing with this whole backstory, and you're competing with with punching power that very few fighters, if any, even remotely possess. So I think
sure.
that's the most unique part about it, and I think he's so confident regarding this fight that we're now finally at the week of it. We're just days away from it now. That I think he's so confident that he knows exactly how the fight is going to play out. That's what
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Maybe that's partially influencing it too, like you were kind of saying before. Like, this year has not been great for him, and Francis even recognized that during the press tour for this fight, for this pay-per-view. It has been a harsh year, losing to Anthony Joshua, losing his child. That I think eventually, when you talk about it, Zan, he has a fire under him, and we talk about when major life events happen to fighters, something gets lit under them. There is something that makes them go to another level. You mentioned Francis already has an aura about him. So, of the 3 title fights we're going to go over, Zan, this is the one I'm least confident in because I think Renan Ferreira always has the potential to surprise. He did that to us with the 2023 PFL Heavyweight Championship, the World Championships pay-per-view last year. He did that to us with Bellator versus PFL, as you mentioned, when he knocked out Ryan Bader as he did. That said, it's hard for me to go against Francis Ngannou with this one. So I'm going to go with Ngannou first round knockout.
How early do you think the fight's gonna play out? Or how early do you think Francis gets it done?
First 3 minutes.
Really? Okay.
First 3 minutes.
I'm gonna go a little shorter, and I actually think he knocks him out in a minute and a half.
All right. Let's go to the co-main event, another super fight championship. This one at women's featherweight. You have Cris Cyborg, the Bellator women's featherweight champion, taking on Larissa Pacheco, who became the first fighter in PFL history to win PFL titles in 2 weight classes, defeating Kayla Harrison in 2022 for the women's lightweight championship, and then winning the women's featherweight season in 2023. Obviously, Zan, this has also been a matchup that has been a long time brewing. You've had the war of words between Cris Cyborg and the Professional Fighters League, the accusations of them stretching out fight negotiations to get Larissa Pacheco, to get her more rusty and get Larissa Pacheco more in, the fresher fighter. Obviously, Cris Cyborg, just like Francis Zan, has also kept herself busy in the boxing realm, and has produced a couple of vicious knockouts in the boxing realm as well.
Oh, yeah.
The way that you noted about Francis, Zan, is the way that I'm going to talk about with Cyborg. Because, yeah, I understand what Cyborg is saying. about those accusations against the PFL. And maybe those kind of accusations could lead me to pick Larissa Pacheco, because I could say, well, is she not confident in herself? But number one, I know that's not Chris Cyborg. She's always confident in herself. And number two, just like what you were saying with Ngannou, when you look at Chris Cyborg's track record and you look at Larissa Pacheco's track record, who's got the better resume? It's Chris Cyborg by a mile. The only time she has lost, Zain, are her professional MMA debut back in 2005 and to Amanda Nunes, the GOAT.
And not only to Amanda Nunes, but it was Amanda Nunes, 14 years later or something?
Yeah.
It's pretty unbelievable.
December of 2018, right. You can say what you want about her last UFC fight at UFC 240, but we kind of assume that there was a little biasness in the commentary for and circumstances surrounding that fight. But then she goes off to Bellator, and nobody in the Bellator women's featherweight roster has held a candle to her.
Nope,
so, and those are right. And if those are some legendary names, like Julia Budd, who's obviously with PFL now, Arlene Blencow, Kat Zingano,
Juliana Velasquez.
Right, Velasquez. So if those names, and I don't want to be disrespectful to Larissa Pacheco and knock off any of her accomplishments. I mean, it took her 3 times, but she beat Kayla Harrison, who's obviously going to be fighting for a UFC championship next. But if all those names who are noteworthy in women's MMA couldn't beat Chris Cyborg, and the only one who was able to do so is the consensus quote of MMA, why would we think Larissa Pacheco has a shot?
And it's even crazier. I don't know if it's still the case now, but there was a stretch where Chris Cyborg, and you can correct me on this if you want, but there was a stretch there for a while where Chris Cyborg was the betting underdog going into this fight, which to me makes no sense.
I get it from the sense of, I guess, the age perspective, but to me, Zain, it's a matter of the reason, let me put it to you this way in another perspective. One in which Dana White's probably going to be calling my phone and cursing me out. Because I said on this show a couple of weeks ago, Zain, that if John Jones and Tom Aspinall ever fought, I would go with Aspinall. And that is because we have seen signs from Jones of slowing down. And we talk about a lack of activity. Chris Cyborg has not slowed down. Chris, at least not of her own will. You can say whatever you want about the negotiation, how long this took for this fight to come to fruition. But even then, we just said Chris Cyborg has kept herself busy in boxing. And I don't consider a loss to the greatest female fighter perhaps ever a sign of slowing down. So in that regard, I can't pick, I understand I have a feeling in me Larissa could have a strong performance, but going off what I said alone, I can't pick against Cyborg. I just can't.
I can't either. And what I think is the most interesting thing about this too is that there's all this consensus hype about Pacheco beat a potential UFC champion you're coming up in the near future. But you just have to remember too, look at Larissa Pacheco's fights before that. I mean, and this is no disrespect to her, but was she really fighting the best caliber competition in the world? An argument could be made that she probably wasn't. So, sorry, did you hear what I said?
Yeah, I did. Sorry, I thought you froze up for a second.
Oh no, I was done.
Okay.
Yeah, I was done.
Okay. Chris Cyborg, Zain, is still, at least in my mind, especially because Amanda Nunes is retired and there's no women's featherweight division in UFC anymore. She is number one, clear-cut number one when it comes to women's featherweight rankings all over the world, even at this later stage of her career. So
1,000%.
It's Larissa Pacheco. I get what Cyborg was saying before, and it's I wouldn't be surprised if Larissa Pacheco puts up a stronger performance than some Chris Cyborg diehards would imagine, but I still see Chris Cyborg getting this done in the second round.
Yeah, I would say second. I would say a second round. No, I'm gonna go third round submission for Cyborg.
Oh, you're going to. We've only seen Cyborg win by submission once, I think. That was in Bellator.
Yeah, I think there's gonna be a little. I think there's gonna be a little bit of a surprise.
Okay. Speaking of Bellator, Zan, we actually have one more title fight. The Bellator Middleweight Championship fight, which was supposed to take place last month between Johnny Eblen and Fabian Edwards, their rematch. It was supposed to be on the London card, got postponed. It will now take place on this card, right before the super fights. So Eblen defending his middleweight title here. Zan, I'm going to be very honest. I think, you know how much of a DDP diehard I am. But I think when you look at world middleweight rankings, I think Eblen is right up there with DDP, with Robert Whittaker, with Izzy, Strickland. And some might even say that Eblen tops all of them.
I think he's a 1A, 1B, 1C. You could look at all four of those guys and they could all be one in their own respective category.
I know. Eblen is one of, I think I've been on the record saying this, like him and the other guy that the PFL and has pushed basically to be faces of Bellator, him and Patchy Mix are two of the best fighters, or if not the two best fighters, to not be signed to the UFC. So Eblen pretty much could be, if we're ranking best fighters outside the UFC, Zan, Eblen could be number one in that regard.
No, I don't disagree with you. And I think that's what makes this fight so interesting is because, Eblen's coming with all this hype. Edwards has gone on a nice run of his own, to try to, leave a similar legacy to what his brother built over in the UFC. This is stylistically, to me, the best fight on the entire card. This is to me, this is the people's main event before the co-main and main. This is the fight that if you're a hardcore MMA fan, you should be jacked for this fight, because to me, I think these guys have a lot of qualities that are very similar from a mirror image perspective than anything else. I think this is a fight that's a coin flip fight, but unfortunately for me, I think that Eblen is just a little bit better. I think he gets the job done by decision in a very close fight. What do you think?
I think so, and I can't say it's too soon because I just had to look up when they last fought. Their first fight was a year ago. It was in September of 23. That was Bellator 299. Eblen won by third round knockouts. And I know Fabian Edwards won his contenders fight. I think that was against Aaron Jeffrey earlier this year. But I don't think I've seen anything, Zan, that sparks anything of, interest in a rematch or interest in that anything is going to be different in this kind of rematch. I don't think so. I'm going to go Eblen to retain the title as well. I'll probably say either late second or early third stoppage.
Okay. Interesting. It seems like both of us have a consensus on the top three fights on the main card, which is a good thing.
Yep.
So,
all right. Zan, I know before the show you told me you wanted to go off about this. I did a breaking news stream on Saturday. Because this gets dropped by Bloody Elbow in the middle of the UFC main card, like right before the main event and right before the co-main event. Conor McGregor did an interview with Bloody Elbow during the BKFC card that he was promoting in Spain, which featured a few title fights, featured Oscar Willis versus Ben the Bane Davis. And McGregor said February 1st, Saudi Arabia. That's the new return date. That if that ends up being true, Zan, then we would presume that Saudi would be a pay-per-view. It would be 3/12, 2 weeks after 3/11 in California. But McGregor had what was noteworthy was McGregor had a different name all of a sudden now for a potential return fight. It would no longer be Michael Chandler, who obviously has since been rebooked against Charles Oliveira for the Garden. It will now be Dan Hooker. Now, obviously, that raised a few eyebrows, raised a few laughs on Saturday because McGregor, and I even said it's McGregor, so I don't believe it. Dan Hooker was at BKFC. He was actually in the corner of Oscar Willis He and McGregor had a few, a nice little conversation in the ring while all that was going on. Hooker then the next day did an interview with Submission Radio, obviously based in Australia. And Hooker was asked, hey, you and McGregor were talking. Conor came out to bloody elbow and said, February 1st, Saudi Arabia, what do you think? And he basically was like, yeah, I mean, we have a decent bond. We have similar interests, etc. Given respect, and said, I'm down for it. We just got to get the UFC on board. So I raved and ranted. I said, I'm not believing a word that comes out of Conor McGregor's mouth. And yet here we are again, just this never-ending cycle. Obviously, Zan, we've talked about previously, and I've mentioned in articles I produced for MMA News related to this. Conor has 2 fights left on his UFC deal. He says he wants to fight twice in 2025. He basically has given us the hint he wants out of his UFC contract. We know, I think we're smart enough to know, the UFC don't want him out of the contract. They want him locked up. Your thoughts here?
Well, I just think this is ridiculous and a little bit disrespectful to Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker should be waiting around to see what happens with the lightweight title picture next. He shouldn't be worried about what's going on with a guy that hasn't fought in a professional MMA fight since I was physically present in July of 2021. Is it a big fight for international MMA? Is it a big fight for Australia? Would the whole country come out to see it? Yes, but at this point in Conor McGregor's career and at this point in Dan Hooker's career, is it really the fight that Hooker deserves? Given who he's beaten in his last couple opponents, and given how he looked in August in Perth in his last fight, I don't understand that this is my issue with this is I don't understand that this is a step up in competition for him.
I'll say, here's what I'm going to say, Zed. It's not. It's definitely not. And I definitely, I have advocated that Dan Hooker now has a sign, depending on what goes on with the lightweight picture, depending on what goes on with Islam's injury, what could happen next at the lightweight title scene. At the same time, I don't think Dan Hooker gets this fight if he loses to Mateusz Gamrot in August.
I don't think so either.
So if Hooker's getting the opportunity for, as Conor likes to say, red panty night, are you going to blame him for chasing after? Because then, honestly, my feelings about what I was going in the prediction for a Chandler fight. I said Chandler first round knockout. I think Hooker is more than capable of knocking Conor out in the first round. So he'd get a payday. He'd get, a solid knockout given his striking abilities. He'd get a win bonus. I think, and he would probably still keep himself in the lightweight title scene.
Yeah, I mean, all that could relatively be true. But again, as you sort of alluded to, you're not going to believe Conor does anything until he
steps in the cage. Yes, and it's not just because it's a couple of things. One, obviously, you see Conor and his other business ventures, him with the BKFC, him constantly drinking and partying. So I don't think he has an interest in getting in the octagon again. And like I said, because I should say, my editor and I had a conversation about this, and obviously neither of us believe it. But he threw something out there. Obviously, this is Saudi Arabia. And like I told you before the show, they made, I forget who it was. Maybe it was Turkey, had some comments after the first Saudi card in August, said, I want something bigger when they come for the second time.
Turkey did say that. Yep.
So, yeah, I call him Turkey, obviously, for those who don't always listen to the show, because that's Dana's nickname for him.
Yeah.
So he said, so basically in my mind, bigger would have to equate to pay-per-view. Maybe it doesn't have to, especially given there are rumors that they're going to go to Sydney again in February. I mean, maybe we are looking at a stretch, Zan, like I think it was last year, 2 years ago, we have 3 pay-per-views in the span of a month. I don't think that's completely out of the picture, knowing the UFC, knowing TKO. But the main point was, if Turkey and any Saudi officials ask for it, does Dana have to, if that's what they want, and they have all the money and power, is that what they're going to get? They're going to get Conor?
I would assume, yeah, probably, if that's what Saudi Arabia wants.
And the only thing that I would say, that saves the UFC and may make them relent is Conor would still have one more fight left on his contract. Because that's the thing. I think the UFC, like I said, is very reluctant to let him fight because they don't want him going over, and doing a BKFC fight with Mike Perry, for instance.
No, they certainly don't. And especially when the UFC can keep him tied to their roof, but also have the partnership with the Saudis, it would be a win-win for everyone. And what definitely would not be a win-win is him going over and fighting, or going over and competing in BKFC, which seems clear they're looking to rival the UFC with their own blend of combat sports. So they don't want to see Conor go over to a rival promoter. So this is their way of trying to keep the peace and make everybody happy, which is getting the Saudis involved, assuming that that's what they're going to try to do.
The only thing I would say is the assumption was 312 was going to be Islam and Sarukian, which means either Islam's injury is worse than we expect, or if you're Islam, then keep in mind who Islam's the protege of, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Conor McGregor's longtime rival. Just imagine if their title fight, like we talk about it being a rarity, but you never know if a Conor card gets put as a co-main to Conor. Don't you think those two might be a little bitter?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think there would be legitimately some very dark, let's just use simpler terms. There would be some dark things said if
this fight goes as planned and that fight ends up being co-main, yeah.
Oh,
I don't think they should share the stage at the press conference or it would get bad.
Oh, I think they would be separated as far away as they could possibly get. They may even have to be escorted by 2 security teams each, and not just one. That's how tense that scene might get.
I think the other thing is just, obviously, we can't always believe what comes out of Conor's mouth. But I think, and I kind of talked about this in a couple of MMA news articles I wrote, Sam, but if this is true, this is a bit of a 180, because when Oliveira Chandler 2 was announced, Dana said, after Oliveira Chandler 2, we could still do Chandler versus McGregor. This would be a complete turnaround.
And even in this scenario, it could still be possible too.
I guess so, but at the same time, I guess you kind of already answered my final question here, because I said it because I said it on the breaking news stream. Maybe you think there's still a possibility, because I guess I'll just get to the question. If this is true, this news, if Conor somehow ends up being right, does that make the Oliveira rematch November 16th MSG, does that make it a must-win for Chandler?
Oh, 1,000%. I think it's a must-win regardless.
I know, I should say it doesn't make it more of a must-win than ever.
1,000,000%, yes.
Because in my mind, Zain, my mind, if this news is true, then if he loses the Oliveira fight, he's out of the title picture. Conor moves on from him. He's basically just wasted the last 2 years of his career. And at that point, and we kind of talked, you might be looking retirement in the face.
Unfortunately, yep. 100%. And it's one of those things too where,
unless maybe you are right, because now I think unless Conor puts up an egg against Hooker, gets knocked out in the first round.
Well, then that could be a retirement scenario for him, though.
But McGregor wants to fight out his contract. He wants that last fight. He does, because he doesn't want to be under the UFC's roof anymore.
Well, if he loses to Hooker, then you give him Nate Diaz.
That's what I've said.
That's what I think.
So,
because imagine this: the dream scenario is this. Let me just lay it out for you, for those general sports fans who love playoff scenarios and all that sort of thing. This is the scenario. So I would say this: if Conor were to fight Dan Hooker, a Conor win. I'm just going to lay it out. I think if Conor beats Dan Hooker, the next time we see him is in June. Okay. Who he fights or when he fights in that month is to be determined. But let's just go off the assumption that Chandler beats Oliveira. Conor versus Chandler happens 1 year after it was supposed to, in June's or right around UFC 316.
Even if Conor doesn't re-sign?
Well, you said that he needed to fight out his deal. So this would be assuming.
But would the UFC be willing to do that?
I'm gonna get there. Hang on.
Okay. Sorry.
So here, let me just start over again. So he fights Dan Hooker. He beats Dan Hooker. Okay. And this is also assuming too that Chandler beats Oliveira in the rematch. Okay. Even though that series would be 1-1, the UFC will decide to move on from that. Okay. Then McGregor fights Chandler. Okay. McGregor beats Chandler a year after the fight was supposed to take place. Okay. Then after that, you look at the scope of the lightweight division. We're assuming by this point that Islam would have already fought Arman Tarzukian. Okay. Islam Makhachev beats Arman Tarzukian. The UFC gives McGregor two options. They're like, okay, you can either fight for the UFC lightweight championship for the second time in your career, and if you win, you ride off into the sunset, or we can give you or we can give you two potentially crazy options for a super fight. We can give you Jorge Masvidal at 170 pounds, or we can give you Nate Diaz and do the trilogy, and that's how you end your UFC career. Okay. So I think if the Hooker fight were to happen, this is simply a fast track to an undeserved title shot.
I was going to throw that out there because I'm not the UFC legal expert, but don't they have a rule that if you're a champion when your contract expires, that it gets extended automatically?
Yes. So if you don't fight, if you're a champion and you don't fight for a year, that's what's considered the champion's clause, where it gets extended into the next year.
So let's be real. If Conor wins his next fight, then his next fight, regardless of what happens, is going to be a title fight.
Right.
Just for the UFC to try to extend it. Now, let's say Chandler loses to Oliveira, and we've talked about him seeing retirement in the face. But then all of a sudden, McGregor-Hooker happens, and McGregor gets knocked out in the first round. Do they still do Chandler versus McGregor?
At that point, I think the fight's dead.
Okay.
Because I think I'm one of those people that believes they both need to be coming off wins for that fight to make sense.
But they're both coming off losses, or they were coming off of losses originally, though.
That's true, but now my whole theory of the fight's bigger if they're coming off wins now has a chance to become reality. So
okay, fair enough. Let's talk about very quickly, getting towards the end of the show, the other big news that the UFC dropped on Saturday. UFC 310 has been made official. It will take place December 7th in Las Vegas. Stacked undercard. However, I told you so. They are going to go Bilal Muhammad, Shavkat Rakhmonov for the welterweight title as the main event. Co-main event, Alex Pantoja. They are going to give Kaya Sakura a flyweight title fight in his debut for the Octagon.
Yeah, which according to Jedi Goodman, Kaya Sakura becomes the 24th fighter in UFC history to get a title fight in his first UFC fight, which is pretty crazy.
Is he the first fighter since... I'm trying to think. Was it Joe Soto to get... Or did Tanya Evinger when she fought Chris Cyborg? Was that her debut?
It would have probably had an Evinger, because if you think about the Joe Soto one, that would have been 10 years ago.
True.
And so Evinger would have been what, 6 years ago?
2017.
Right? Okay, so right around there. Okay.
Or would it technically be Nico Montano, because 2018 was the Ultimate Fighter where they did the flyweight?
That actually does count.
Okay, so then it would be her probably.
Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, another fun fact about this card, not sure if you know this, it's the third time in a 5-year span where the UFC welterweight title is being contested for the final pay-per-view of the year.
Well, last year Pantoja defended the flyweight title in the final card of the year too. He took on Royval.
I was talking about main
Oh,
events.
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. But last year they did welterweight, flyweight as well to end the year.
Yeah, that's very unique. I'm not sure the UFC was probably thinking about that when he put these
No.
fights together, but knowing the nerds that we are, we knew that.
Because come on, we had a feeling that they were looking at 310 originally for McGregor Chandler, and then the whole McGregor contract stuff happened.
Right.
So here's your backup plan. I think they kind of, I think it's a couple of different things, Zan. Obviously, we saw the body language when Bilal won the title. I think Shavkat, in Dana's mind, is the best fighter to potentially get that belt off of him. Sorry to your Chicago boy. And number two...
No, I know. I'm very much aware that Shavkat could easily win this fight. I know. Dude, I've been high on Shavkat since his UFC debut. I know.
It's just
going to be a superstar a couple years ago.
Right, so, I know, but it's just also what we talk. He's getting a title shot off a win over Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in 2024.
Not the same Stephen Wonderboy Thompson of 2017.
No,
so.
Unfortunately not. But I guess they're saying, okay, if this is the fight we're going to go, then we're going to end the year with a bang, because they put Pantoja, Asakura, and you know what? I don't mind Asakura getting a title shot in his debut, considering his success over in Japan and being a rising champion and all. They're putting the Gon Volkov fight that got delayed. It is going to end up being at UFC 310. Nick Diaz versus Luque, which got delayed, is going to be UFC 310. The Sterling fight with Evalev that got delayed will also be UFC 310. They're really trying to stack up this card to end the year.
Yeah, there's even Clay Guida versus Chase Hooper on the prelims.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that. Okay, so I've got a feeling 310 on December 7th is going to be... I don't know if it's going to end up beating UFC 300 for fight card of the year, but it's going to be good. It's still going to be solid.
No, I don't think so. Unfortunately, Pereira is not saving one more pay-per-view. Would that have been unbelievable, though?
He was not healthy even going into the fight with Roundtree, and he managed to pull off a come from behind. Let him rest. Let him clinch fighter of the year. Let's leave it at that.
I agree. I was just more so asking how the sure madness would have been.
It's still a possibility. You never know. Just let's try our best to save him for early 2025.
I don't disagree. I'm just a little disappointed though, because this is not the main event that I would have put for UFC 310. What I would have done was which, by the way, I have to thank you for this. I would have done your original idea, which was move Jones Stipe to Vegas.
What would you have done for the Garden then?
So what I would have done for the Garden is an outstanding question. How I would have done it, I would have totally flipped this thing. What I would have done was, I would have done. This is assuming that no one was hurt at the time, but if it was me, you would have done Islam Makhachev in Abu Dhabi. You would have done some fight for UFC 307 as the main event that didn't involve Pereira.
You would have done Pereira at the Garden?
Yeah, I would have.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Fair enough. He's made events at the Garden before.
And then you would have ended the year with the heavyweight title fight. And you would have still had these two fights also on the card, or as if the main event fell out, one of these fights would have gotten eventually elevated to the hypothetical main event in that scenario.
True. So I guess then at this point, Zan, us playing our matchmaker, schedule maker, we're going to assume at this point 311 in Cali, Duplessis defending against Strickland or Whitaker.
That would make sense unless they can get South Africa done, which is still not clear.
Right, that's still there. There's a rumor of Sydney. I forgot about that. I just said in February that maybe they want to save them for if Whitaker beats Chimaev.
Then you have to assume March is Las Vegas, as it usually is. And you got to assume also there could be a second March pay-per-view as there has in previous years.
I don't know if they do that if they do 2 February with Saudi and Sydney.
assuming that Saudi goes ahead as a pay-per-view.
That's true
So,
too. Yeah.
right. So, if you were to guess, what do you think UFC 311 through 314 looks like? If you were to guess locations.
I'm going to assume with 312, given what we said and given it's Conor, I'm still going to assume that's Islam versus Sarukian for the lightweight title.
Okay.
I think they're going to have 312 be a pay-per-view. I mean, 312 would be a pay. I assume Saudi would be 312 as a pay-per-view. 311.
Okay, what about 313? See, 313 in Vegas, I think is going to be whatever's up with the heavyweight division.
Well, no, wouldn't 313 be Sydney if that gets done?
Oh, yes. Okay, so we're assuming 2 pay-per-views in February, right?
I'm going to assume 2 pay-per-views in February.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that there's just gonna be one, and I would say 313 is
Vegas.
whatever's up with the heavyweight division.
Okay. I think whatever's up with the heavyweight division will be one main event. I would say the Vegas one in March, whether that's 313, 314. I think the fate of 311 and 313, Zan, could depend on that Whitaker-Chimaev matchup later this month.
I don't disagree with that.
I think if Whitaker puts on a strong performance and finishes Chimaev, or if Chimaev pulls out of the fight, I know the Strickland rematch has been there and Strickland's waiting it out, but at that point, I would think you'd have to give Whitaker a rematch with Duplessis for the title.
Especially if one of those guys isn't healthy. Yeah. I don't disagree. And I would guess if it was me in April, it's gonna sound crazy. I think you get the Merab O'Malley rematch in April. That's what I think.
I can see that too. All right, let's move on. Let's do quickly. We got a couple of recaps. We'll have one more preview. Beterbiev versus Bivol. Fun fight. Close fight. I don't know if I'm going to cry robbery like everybody else. I do think that I agreed with everybody else that I thought Bivol won the fight. But, I think a draw, like that one judge had it a draw. I don't think I'm pretty mad at a draw. I think that would have been...
From the highlights I saw, I think I would have scored it a draw.
I think a draw would have been fine. 7-5 either way would have been fine. I had it 7-5 Bivol. I don't know necessarily where you get the 8-4. Who that judge with the 116, 112, that outcry I completely get.
Yeah, Eddie Hearn was pissed about that. It was more than obvious.
Yeah. Obviously, he was going to be pissed because his guy lost, but
he would have liked to see. He said in that interview he'd like to see Beterbiev grant Bivol a rematch, and I think if that's what Saudi Arabia wants, I think that's what they're going to end up getting.
But of course, the politics of boxing, the WBA is now going to come up with a mandatory challenger.
Because of course they will.
Hold on. There you go.
As usual. The same thing, even though we don't have it as a banner, the same thing can be said for Gervonta Davis versus Lamont Roach. No one would have anticipated Lamont Roach getting a title shot against Gervonta Davis after what he did to Frank Martin. It's the same cycle over and over again.
Yeah, and Turkai can try and do whatever he can, and I know he's done some good with the sport, but the politics are still there, unfortunately.
Which is why I think Dana's refusing to answer any boxing questions at this point, because I think he's starting to reconsider again for the third time. I think he's walking back his comments about if he's really getting into it or not. That's my theory.
You hear Zuffa Boxing's music; it's about to make a big entrance, and then it just retreats back.
You never know.
I mean, I would like to see a rematch. I did think Bivol was the one that should have come out on top, but obviously there were a lot of circumstances pointing to Beterbiev, and honestly, Beterbiev was landing the more powerful shots. He had the more powerful moments in the fight. If we're talking around, but you know what? This is boxing, and even if it wasn't boxing, I was going to say if this was an MMA, I would say this is US-based MMA. We have the must system, the round system. You know what I feel, Zan. You know how I feel about scoring. I think for scoring for fights, at least in the MMA side, but maybe, I don't know, we can stretch it. I don't know. I prefer Pride style, global rule style. Score it as a whole.
That's how most people feel. I'm indifferent on the must system. Do I think it needs to change? Of course, but I think it's just too hard. As for someone in layman's terms like me who likes simple numbers, I think a 10-point system in my brain at least makes sense. But to the literal judges judging the fight, it doesn't seem that way. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Vegas 98 card, let's transition over that. I mean, we'll talk about this great fight, but Zan, I mean, the one thing that came out of the Vegas 98 was just questionable decision after decision. The Saudi Amato had an interesting night.
You sure
It
did,
just,
especially in that co-main event, a split decision for Jung Young Park. Like, really?
a split. Yeah, like it wasn't a unanimous, it was a split. Like how? I just I don't
By
know,
the way,
Zan.
the whole arena gasped when the second scorecard of that fight was read because we were all looking at each other thinking the same thing, that he was about to get screwed.
I mean, there was already arguably a screw earlier in the night. I mean, Zan, it stinks because on both ends, boxing and MMA, once again, it is another week where we're just sitting here saying what the is wrong with judging these days. Like
Well, I think it has something to do with Nevada, because if you go back and look at most of these really bad decisions, they primarily take place in one state, and that state is literal Nevada. And look at where it happened again.
yeah, I mean, Texas has its own flaws. New York's had its own flaws. But I know what you're talking about because Nevada's a long time history with combat sports and the fact that it's the headquarters of the UFC.
Yep.
All right. Now let's talk about this fight because this fight was actually fun and phenomenal.
It was a phenomenal fight. First off, getting a chance to see Tatsuro Taira in person, like watching him fight was a literal masterclass. I mean, he fought as well as he could against a former title challenger. Had him in some dangerous spots early in the fight. Nearly finished him midway through. I think it was round 3, early round 4, where he reversed position and nearly had Royval finished. But overall, it was a great fight against two guys that deserved to be in there. And I was talking to some people afterward. I'm like, I think with the direction that the UFC Apex might be going, it's going to be a long time before you see 1 versus 5 fight in a main event in that intimate of a setting. I mean, that's a fight that deserved an arena in itself. To me, this is the fight that should have headlined the Macau show. And for me to be able to say that I saw it in person, one of the best, not just flyweight fights of the year, but fights of the year period, was just unbelievable. So,
Yeah, no, it was crazy. I mean, Royval got the better of him, I think, in the first round, up until the point it was like later on in the round where Tyra snapped his head back, scored a takedown, and from there he just, like you said, in the second round had complete control of him on the grappling. He had multiple submission attempts on him. Then here's Royval, kept the fight standing in the third, up until the point where he basically was able to, he had a number of hard shots on him. Herzog was looking close, ready to step in. And then Royval decided to go for an armbar, which was good, but I kind of questioned that. I would have just, continued to land shot after shot to try to get the TKO there. Taira got out of it and got right to the back. He ends up trying to get the choke on Royval, and Taira continues, in the fourth round to just dominate Royval over. And then what does Royval do in the fifth round? He lives up to his nickname of the Raw Dog, continues to land hard shots on the feet, and then Royval went for a guillotine. And I'm like, was this going to be another, questionable decision, I should say? And no, instead, Royval actually has the grappling control in the fifth round. So it all came down to one of those early rounds because, like I said, in the first round, Royval got the better of him, though Taira ends up scoring the takedown, has the grappling control leading into round 2. Fun fight. It's probably not going to win fight of the year considering we still had Gaethje and Holloway, but this was definitely one of the best fights the UFC has produced this year. Like you said, we're probably never going to see 1 versus 5 in an intimate setting as this one ever again. Tara,
maybe
yeah.
ever again. I hope I hope ever again is not the case. I just know that I probably probably saw one of the last ones where this was the literal scenario as
Yeah.
a 1 versus 5.
Taira also, this is his first loss. But you know what? It's to Brandon Royval. He's gonna rebound. Brandon Royval, he's gonna have to fight down again. I mean, Pantoja got the clear better of him last year, so he's obviously not gonna get a title shot for a while. Yeah, I mean, Brandon Royval still, saying like there were questions about Royval after that loss to Pantoja last year, but I think he answered them and then some of this performance.
I think so too. And I think, Royval, he said in his post-fight interview, the only thing he wants next is a title shot, and I think he'll end up getting it. And
You think so?
And don't be surprised if the UFC flies him out to UFC 310, puts him in the front row to watch Pantoja and Asakura, because that's gonna be a great fight.
Do you think he gets one even if Pantoja retains against Asakura?
I think so, because you have a storyline to sell there anyway.
I guess.
And it was he fought well. It wasn't as close as people expected, but it was close in some people's eyes. I thought the judges got it right that night, but I still think there's a storyline to be sold there if you do that fight.
Fair enough. And we go back to the Apex this weekend. Anthony Hernandez taking on Michel Pereira in the main event. What do you have for this one, Zain?
It's going to be a good fight. Both of these guys have very unique styles. Pereira's a little crazier. Hernandez is a little bit more tactical. I'm going to go conservative and say Hernandez wins, but would not be surprised if we see another highlight reel knockout from the Brazilian. What do you think?
I kind of like what you said at the very start, because I think that's pretty much what sums up this fight for me, Zain, is a tactical fighter against a fighter that's just completely out of control and can end things very quickly. Hernandez is on a 5-fight win streak. He ended up beating Roman Kopylov earlier this year. That was 298. He was actually supposed to face Roman Dolidze at UFC 302, but that fight ended up getting postponed. I believe that was an injury for Hernandez. Hernandez tore his ligament, so he wasn't able to fight. These guys actually were supposed to fight on the no-shade UFC card, but I guess this card really needed a main event, so it ends up getting pushed here. As far as Pereira goes, Pereira is on a solid 8-fight winning streak. Coming off earlier this year, he finished Michel Oleksiejczuk, and he actually ended up submitting Ihor Peteria at 301. So Pereira is on a, regardless of what you think of Pereira, he is on a solid win streak and has had the capabilities of finishing fights. I know Hernandez is tactical, but I think the win streak that Pereira's on is pretty much setting him up as a dangerous fighter. I would not be surprised if Pereira got another finish here, probably another second or third round submission.
Interesting. I could see a finish in this fight, but I think Hernandez will be able to win that fight across 25 minutes. So I actually like him by decision.
Okay. So we have some questions about this weekend's main event. Obviously, the PFL side, you and I are complete agreement on the top 3 fights. So a lot of interesting fights this weekend. Enjoy them. And then next week, the two of us will be back here to preview UFC 308.
Yeah, it's wild that we're already to that time of the month, and then before you know it, we'll be previewing Edmonton. So we'll see. By the way, did want to say this though. Royval should not only be worried about the fight in December, he should also be worried about that Edmonton main event, because that Edmonton main event is some high stakes too. So we could have a little mini tournament going on without it giving it its formal title, if you will. So who knows?
For sure.
I guess one portion of that tournament between Royval and Taira has been completed. Let's see how the Edmonton side turns out, and then we can go from there.
Definitely. All right, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Again, subscribe to us, youtube.com/ETV Network. get everything for MMA Outsiders, everything else here at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Help us continue our climb to 900, 1,000 subscribers. If you can't watch us or you don't want to watch us, don't want to see our ugly mugs, take MMA Outsiders with you wherever you get your podcasts. Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so much more. Again, if you are listening, make sure to go to the video side of youtube.com/YouTube Network, our YouTube home, our YouTube base. Help us support us there. And shout out to our friends over at Playback. Obviously, as I said, NBA, Playback and the NBA are big partners. Playback, our big sponsor. We'll be doing a bunch of NBA streams in the coming months. Next week, also, time and day to be determined. Right now, I'm aiming, just thinking out loud, right now I'm aiming for Thursday afternoon of next week, the 24th, will be our UFC 308 edition of Fight Study, where the week of the big UFC pay-per-views, we'll obviously be watching some old school fights involving our headliners. In this case, Max Holloway and Ilia Topuria. So we have plenty of UFC 308 hype next week. And of course, next week we'll also recap everything coming out of the PFL Super Fights card.
Yeah, it should definitely be a fun episode coming up for episode 103. But for now, this has been episode 102 of the MMA Outsiders. It's Zain, Bando, and for my co-host Tom Albano to my left. Thank you again for tuning in for another edition of this great show. Again, enjoy the fights this weekend. Thank you again for listening to us ramble, but all of the major news and notes in MMA. Even though there wasn't a ton this week, we still had a very unique topics to get through, and we look forward to continuing this journey as we get through to the end of the year, starting with next week for another edition. So until then, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you guys soon. Have a good one.
See you soon. Take care, everyone.